Hey guys, how's it going? It's Jay here, and welcome back to another episode of Take 2 on SoundStage. Now today we have a pair of speakers from Focal. It's called the Focal Diablo Colour Evo loudspeakers. What a mouthful. It is about $17,000 US, and this was reviewed by Hans on SoundStageUltra.com. You can go read his review by visiting SoundStageUltra.com or by clicking on the link below this video. Now, this speaker, when it arrived, I immediately unpacked it and found that these were pretty gigantic speakers. And just like any famous Focal speakers, it has the 1.1-inch inverted beryllium dome tweeter, and it has the 6.5-inch mid-range woofer with a cone made from Focal's proprietary W material, which comprises 2 layers of woven glass tissue sandwiching a core of Rohacil foam. And on the back, you can find the WBT binding post that they use. And I think that's it in terms of its design characteristics. Now this speaker, for a stand mount or bookshelf speaker, whatever you want to call it, is a pretty big speaker. And when I hooked them up, I thought I would have gotten a little bit more bass than, for example, the Magical A1 speakers that were a lot smaller. But in fact, I got less bass. It wasn't quite as punchy as the Magical A1 speakers that I just reviewed. So the bass is definitely not as strong as the Magical A1s, or perhaps my favorite monitor of all times, the Electa Amateur 3 from Sonos Faber. But I found the bass to be quite fast. It was perhaps the fastest bass that I've heard in all 3 models that I'm comparing here right now. Now, when it goes to the mid-range and the high frequency, the game kind of changes. I found that the mids and high frequencies were the most sharp and most precise on the Focal speakers. Now, it can be fatiguing at times with all the details that are coming out of these speakers, but it is certainly very, very impressive. And although the Magical A1s perhaps did have better imaging, in my opinion, than the Focal speakers here, the Focal speakers had a lot more brilliance and a lot more detail that can be heard in tracks, especially when you put in a very well recorded audiophile track on these speakers. You can certainly appreciate the amount of detail these speakers can provide. Now, with that being said, they are a little bit lean sounding, at least to my preference and my ears. And that adds to the effect of the speaker being a little bit airy and lighter on the top end compared to all the 3 speakers I'm talking about. And that kind of adds to the effect of how these speakers sound very large and very wide in its soundstage. It has immense detail in its 3-dimensionality. It has great depth and separation within instruments. In fact, you can pinpoint and kind of draw the singer or the performance like I talked about on the Magical speakers. So its imaging capability is very, very good. I just think that the Magical A1s are just a tad bit better in my opinion, with a slight bit more of a smoothness in the sound. But overall, the strong characteristic of the Focal speaker here is that, far as I can tell, it is very detailed, it has great soundstage. And another thing that I found about these speakers is that the amplification pairing is quite vital. For example, when I had it hooked up to the Super Nate 3 from Name, I found that the bass was stronger, it was quicker, and it was overall more pleasant. However, when it comes to the high frequencies, I found it to be slightly too bright for my liking. When I had it hooked up to the Kinky Studio monoblocks, I found it that the high frequency were a little bit more tamed, and the bass was just as strong, but not as focused or not as punchy as the Super Nate 3. So it is a compromise, and you have to pick which one you like. But far as I can tell, the amplification does change the speakers quite a bit, and it can be adjusted. Now, perhaps my favorite pairing, however, was ironically the Purify Agitact that I reviewed on SoundStage Take 2, which will be posted before this one or the one after this video. But that amplifier is supposed to show exactly what the speakers are supposed to sound like according to my review. and I found that that amplifier sounded best with these speakers. It was along the midpoint of the Kinky Studio monoblocks and the name Super Nate 3, in that it wasn't as bright as the Super Nate 3, but at the same time it was not as smooth as the Kinky Studio monoblocks with these speakers. And I found that it struck a perfect balance for those listeners that enjoy the Focal sound. And to me, that sounded like the best representation of the Focal house sound that I'm familiar with. Now, another thing is that this speaker is not for those that don't know how to place their speakers. I found that placing these speakers in multiple different spots in my room changed the sound drastically enough for me to take a longer time with this speaker than I intended to. So first of all, when I had them directly towards my ears, I found that to be actually less bright than having them directly out towards the room. Now I find that interesting because it usually is the other way around. When you tilt the speakers out into the room, it sounds less bright, and that's how it usually is in my space and most people's spaces. But in this case, when I had the speakers directly towards my ears, I found that to be less bright, and I found that to be more enjoyable than having the speakers out into the room, which I found to be a little bit more splashy. Now, if you're thinking that my room is untreated, and that's the issue, that is not the case. My room is fully treated. In fact, I found that removing my first reflection point acoustic treatment really elevated the splashiness on the speaker in the high frequencies. But when I had the first reflections treated, I found that the high frequency was much more tamed and much more detailed and precise. So for those of you that are considering this speaker, definitely consider playing around with the placement. I would say that the general rule of thumb is to have the speakers tilted towards your ears, but not so much at ear level, but more so between the tweeter and the woofer, and have the speakers out into the room about 3 foot from the wall where the speakers are. And that's how I would set them up. And as a general rule of thumb, to add to the factor, I would highly advise that you have your room treated or have the acoustic, at least the first point reflection treated for these speakers. So thank you for watching. That is it for this review. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like the video if you liked the video, and make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already. And I'll see you guys on the next one.